hello and welcome to Pluribus Unum's Fireside Chats. Not as good as 50 hours, but hey, it's something. Now, before we get into the episode itself, let's do some slight housekeeping. If you notice, my voice is still like a tiny smidgen, a little, sniffly, whatever. But I'm basically at the tail end of my illness, I believe. I feel significantly better. Basically, the one issue I have is that, I feel like the inside of my ear needs to, pop. I just need one of my ears to just, pop and then I'll be fine, essentially. Or at least that's how I interpret it. If I'm not better by Monday, then I'll go back to the doctor just to, see what's up. Probably ask specifically about that. I guess specifically that's the thing that I'm worried about. Just to make sure it's not, anything serious. Also, the day this episode comes out is the beginning of the end of America. Congratulations, everybody! With that out of the way, let's get right into the news. First, I guess we're going to talk about the first big news story, the biggest one. Let's just get into the biggest one. The biggest news story, of course, is the fact that Israel and Palestine have reached a Gaza ceasefire agreement. Now, I actually had to look to see, what is the actual ceasefire agreement. From what I've seen, basically, it's just 16 days of them not fighting, and then they'll swap some prisoners with the hope that after those 16 days, they go back to the table and then hopefully negotiate a more permanent ceasefire. There's been cessations of violence in the past that are similar to this, but not quite like this. This especially comes at a head with the end of the Biden administration and the beginning of the Trump administration. So there are some people who are trying to basically there are a lot of people who try to figure out a lot of different things to say. For example, one of the big things that happened is that when this ceasefire was announced, Biden literally, as he was leaving, a news organization literally asked him, hey, who gets credit for this? You or Trump? And then he said, are you joking? And they said, no. That's because Trump has actually decided to take credit for the ceasefire resolution because it's happening just right now. Basically, he's even went so far as to just admit that he, happened earlier in the year, that he's admitted to violating the Logan Act by basically colluding with Benjamin Netanyahu to make sure that the ceasefire agreement doesn't happen until recently. Going so far as to make it seem like they're actually trying to delay the ceasefire agreement by a day. So, the idea is that the ceasefire agreement is supposed to be either starting on the 17th to the ideal date is the 19th, but people are saying that they're even pushing to try and push this date by one day to tie it with Inauguration Day. And a lot of libs have immediately went to go man, Trump did all this, blah, blah, blah. They're trying to shit on Trump for this, but it's you guys were the ones with the incompetent president that literally allowed this to happen. I'm sorry, guys, but you just, I hate every single person in this situation. I hate every single person in this interaction that isn't the Palestinians. Literally, it's I hate Hamas, I hate fucking Benjamin Netanyahu, and I think Trump and Biden trying to claim credit for this is stupid because both of them are one's on the left nut, one's on the right nut. Because really they both just love Israel, they're just gonna do everything Israel wants. It's not really gonna change much. We've had some people celebrate and it's yes, for the next 16 days, it'll be commendable and we'll be happy to see a ceasefire happen. Problem is, what happens next? Because again, the person who's in charge now is going to be someone who unilaterally 100% agrees with everything Israel says and does, and will literally send millions, if not billions of dollars to them. So what do you think is going to happen when Israel just decides, we don't want to do this deal no more, and we're just going to start attacking again? What do you think is going to happen? What do you think is going to happen? What do you think is going to happen? Just keep that in mind. Just keep that in mind. Literally, I'm not celebrating until I see, months, if not years, of literal no violence. Literally. Next news story coming from Mexico. Transgender rights activist Samantha Gomes Fonseca murdered in Mexico City. This is a story I just heard about today, and it's actually interesting. A transgender rights activist and Senate hopeful was murdered Sunday in the southern Mexico City of, can't pronounce that name. It's spelled Zochimilco. So, closest pronunciation I can say is Xochitl, authorities say. Samantha Carolina Gomes Fonseca, a trans woman who was hoping to stand as a Senate candidate for the ruling Morena Party at the elections in June, was shot dead while traveling in a vehicle affiliated with a ride-sharing company, according to the Mexico City Attorney General's office. Journalist Carlos Jimenez sent out an X social media platform that Gomes was killed after visiting an inmate at the Reclusor Sur men's prison. He said that she got into a DD vehicle after leaving the prison and was shot and killed by a man who approached the car when it was going over a speed bump. The FGJ, said it was investigating the murder under the protocol of femicide, a crime defined as the killing of a woman or girl on account of her gender. The Mexico City security minister said that authorities were looking at surveillance camera footage to identify the probable culprits. And the reason I heard about this is because currently there are a bunch of activists that are literally trashing the entirety of a office building in the capital of Mexico City, I believe. Yeah, that's it's just pretty interesting to see that. I mean, again, like, it's one weird thing where it's like, I guarantee you that if this case happened in the United States, it would be completely politicized, and it will be completely politicized, especially with the rise of the fucking, like, anti-trans movement that is literally trying to claim that Sarah McBride is a pedophile, and then also conveniently pushing like legislation that will kill anybody who is labeled a pedophile. So it's like, I wonder what's happening. Interesting. Anyways, next news story. South Korea's President Yoon Suk-Yeol arrested as agencies probe his short-lived martial law decree. South Korean President Yoon Suk-Yeol was arrested Wednesday by the country's corruption investigative offices for high-ranking officials, a first for a sitting South Korean leader. This was the second bid to arrest the impeached president following a failed attempt on January 3rd when agents from South Korea's Presidential Security Service had blocked investigators from entering Yoon's office. Unlike the first attempt, this time there were no individuals or security staff actively obstructing the execution, and there was no significant physical clashes, the CIO said. About 3,000 police officers were involved in the second attempt to secure access to Yoon's compound, news agency Yonhap said. South Korean media outlets also reported that Yoon, in a pre-recorded video, said that the law of the country has collapsed and called the CIO's investigation illegal. Yoon said that he would appear before the CIO to prevent an unpleasant bloodshed, according to Google Translation in Korean. So, basically, there's still like a bit of a constitutional crisis because Yoon Suk-Yeol is still trying to refuse to not get jailed for his crimes, and everybody's trying their best to make sure that he is still tried for his crimes. Hopefully, he'll be able to stay in jail this time, and maybe things will go good. Anyway, speaking of things that maybe might go good, there's a bit of interesting things that are developing with the DNC chair election. Okay, so first, the one that I have an actual news story attached to, former Bernie Sanders campaign manager Faiz Shakir enters DNC chair race. Faiz Shakir, who led Bernie Sanders' 2020 presidential campaign, is jumping into the race for chair of the Democratic National Committee, injecting a new candidate into the low-key contest. Shakir confirmed his candidacy in a text message to Politico, the New York Times first reported Shakir's decision. Shakir's late entry into the race could shake up the contest that has largely focused on party mechanics rather than its ideology. In a letter to DNC members, Shakir says he became frustrated by the lack of vision and conviction for what to do to restore a deeply damaged Democratic brand, prompting his decision to join the race. We all seemingly agree, rhetorically at least, that focusing on winning back America's diverse working class is of the utmost priority, Shakir wrote in his letter to DNC members. But I have listened to our candidates, and I sense a constrained status quo style of thinking. We cannot expect working class audiences to see us as any different if we are not offering anything new or substantive to attract the support. And there are a couple of other things that have made this race a little bit of an interesting thing. For example, Beto O'Rourke has kind of bowed out of the race. He hasn't technically bowed out of the race, but he is running for the Texas Democratic Party chair position. So there's a chance that he's probably like interested in like seeking that instead of actually seeking the DNC chair position. Especially because again, it's kind of too late for him to really make a difference. So it's like, why is Faiz Shakir running? Well, it's simply because he believes that his particular brand of like progressive leftism or like progressive liberalism is just not being representative in his thing. And I mean, I'm pretty sure that ideologically he's a good candidate. You know, he has some like actual like levels of like activism. You know, he informally advised Bernie's 2016 bid, but as it says, he was the campaign manager for the was he the campaign manager or was it? He was a campaign member, campaign manager of the 2020 bid. So let's just say, yeah. I mean, I'm sorry, guys, but it's like that bid didn't work. So, I mean, and yeah, it's like, yeah, I said this at the time. It's like, yes, yes, there was the game was rigged against him from the beginning, but it's like Bernie could have bounced back, and unfortunately, Faye Shakir is the one who's kind of going to get the blame for all that, so it's like, I don't know about that. Apparently, Jonathan Jackson has stated that he is, I really don't know, he said that he said that the DNC chair, he said that he should be the DNC chair, but he hasn't actually entered the race, it seems? I don't know why. James Skoufis has actually apparently suspended his bid to back Ken Martin, and apparently the race is getting to the point where Ken Martin, and I don't know if Ben Wickler has actually started, but at least Ken Martin has actually started doing jabs towards Ben Wickler. Basically, one of the big things that he said is like, it's like, I'm the only candidate in this, like, he's like, yes, we all agree that unions and workers should be the ones who are leading the Democratic Party, and I know that from experience because I'm the only person in the race who is a union member. Unlike some people who are running, my father wasn't an ambassador, he was a working man. You know, basically throwing jabs at Ben Wickler, who, it seems, is trying to do the, he's trying to take the mantle, like, I'm the pro-labor candidate, especially considering he has recently gotten endorsements of a lot of members of labor unions, or, like, there are a couple of labor unions, the SEIU, and a couple of others that have endorsed his bid. And I will say this, I guess I should say this, I didn't get to say this in my DNC election video prior, but it's like, we gotta say one more thing, because, like, Ben Wickler, or, like, I mean, regardless of if you're, like, a Ben Wickler guy or a Ken Martin guy, because I know a lot of you guys are, like, there's some of you guys that are like, I like Ben Wickler, I like Ken Martin. And it's like, yeah, I like Ken Martin, I think Ken Martin would be a good choice. And if Ken Martin's not the DNC chair, I really do believe that the Democrats are just kind of fucked, 100%. But I'll say this, I don't think that Ken Martin becoming the DNC chair is a magical, like, savior of the party. Because it's like, the Democrats have been in this situation before, where they've had a candidate who is, like, represents the Democratic wing of the Democratic Party, and they've led the Democratic Party, and then almost immediately it just imploded and went back to status quo. Howard Dean ran as, like, I'm the Democratic wing of the Democratic Party, stealing that from Paul Wellstone, the person that Ken Martin is inspired by, and is saying, like, and he ran this bid, and it worked. It worked. He did win. The Democrats did win in the 2006 and 2008 elections. But then what happened afterwards? Things just went back to status quo. And that's the thing. Ken Martin could 100% just do that. Where it's like, for the short term, it's like, things look great. And then in the long term, it's like, but ultimately, nothing changes. I mean, and if that happens with Ken Martin, I mean, Ken Martin stinks if that happens. I don't know if that'll happen. I hope it won't. And from what I've seen, I think that Ken Martin would be a good DNC chair. But I mean, you gotta remember, he's still a Democrat, so it's like, you gotta remember that. Anyways, now with all that out of the way, let's move on to the main topic of this video. The 2025 Ecuadorian presidential election. The Ecuadorian presidential election is one that I've been trying to cover for a while now, but unfortunately, I just never had the chance. I think I covered it in news stories every so often, but I never got to cover it as a full episode because it just didn't really line up right. Now it is lined up right. Here we go, better chance than ever. So let's just get into it. First, prelude and importance of the race. We actually don't have to go that far for the election's prelude. I know it's kind of like it's kind of a joke when I do this, but like whenever I do foreign elections, especially Latin American ones, it's like, oh, we have to go way back to like 1968. But this one, we don't have to go that far. All you have to go back to is 2006, when Ecuador elected its first socialist president, Rafael Correa. Correa came in with a very ambitious idea, called the Citizens' Revolution, which sought to make Ecuador into a self-sufficient nation free from Western imperialism. A lot of the stuff that you would expect coming from a pink-tide nation, creating a new constitution that prioritized the economic and social rights of the underprivileged, opposing the IMF and the World Bank, working on an agreement with China to get cheap medicine, increasing funding for family planning procedures like the morning after pill, increased funding for the disabled, raised the minimum wage, and restructured the way they did crime, which led to the homicide rate in the nation to drop by 10.4%, coinciding with a decent drop in poverty, making Ecuador the safest nation in Latin America at the time. Another big thing that happened in his administration was the fact that he allowed Julian Assange asylum in the Ecuadorian embassy in the UK. But not everything was 100% positive. He very frequently clashed with media that was very critical of him, both in his own country and worldwide. There's a very famous interaction where John Oliver was very critical of Rafael Correa, and then Rafael Correa got into an actual flame war with him. And there were many people who protested against Correa, and because of the fact that he was very heavily reliant on oil. While he still had environmentalist tendencies, he prioritized the oil reserves of the nation over them, which did have a problem as soon, same thing with Venezuela, the price of oil went down, so the economy, which based almost the entirety of their economy on the oil reserves, went into a bit of a recession. But that mattered little, because at the time, Correa was term limited, and decided to push for the nomination of his first vice president to be the new president of Ecuador. That man being Lenin Moreno, who, after being elected to basically be a continuation of Rafael Correa, decided to do a complete 180 on all of his policies. He dropped any semblance of green politics in his oil policies and went taladro bebe taladro, took a $1 billion loan from the IMF, reduced companies' tax rates and public spending, revoked Julian Assange's asylum, pulled out of every partnership that Ecuador had with the Pink Tide nations, sent weapons to Bolivia to overthrow Evo Morales, literally the complete antithesis of Correa, who would soon become very critical of his successor, and they would begin to clash in a very notable way. July 3rd of 2018, the Moreno administration ordered the arrest of Rafael Correa over an allegation that Correa had actually tried to kidnap an opposition figure named Fernando Balda, who was currently residing in Colombia. And the Ecuadorian government demanded that Interpol force Correa to come back to the country to face the music, because at the time, he was residing in Belgium. Now you might be wondering, why was Balda in Colombia? Well, Balda was in Colombia because he was running away from Correa for possibly having connections to an attempt to overthrow Correa's government back in 2010. And Interpol, actually, when they got involved in it, they immediately rejected Moreno's claim because they stated it was, quote, obviously a political matter, with some even going so far as to state that this trial was probably meant to be a plea to get the right to support him come the next election. Basically, it's look, guys, I know I've been, connected with Correa for a long time, but look, I'm trying to get him arrested, so please, guys, support me, please, please, please. There was even a point where they did officially declare they were going to arrest him, but then later, later on, they literally just said, we were told by, people in the government to lie about Correa so that we could get him in jail. So it's very interesting. And surprisingly, this did not turn out so well for Moreno and the party that he was given by Correa, because, surprisingly, when you decide to run as a next generation of one particular politician, and then decide to completely run to the exact opposite wing of that politician, naturally, you're not going to get help from anybody, because the people who already hate that politician don't trust you because you were aligned with this politician for so long. It's why are you changing your mind now? But then also, the people who were supporting you because you were tied to this politician, now they don't like you because you're running against this politician. So eventually, Moreno just decided that he wasn't going to bother running for re-election, and then his party ended up getting 8th place out of 16 candidates. Correa had a nominee ready to fight for the control of the nation, even attempted to join the ticket himself as vice president, but due to the criminal proceedings and the fact that he was in Belgium, that wasn't happening. Get ready for Wave 3 of the Pink Tide to come back to Ecuador, my friends. But that ended up happening. The one who ended up winning instead would be a guy by the name of Guillermo Lasso, a conservative who was noticeably further right than even Moreno. He began massive privatization efforts, planned to expand oil drilling in the nation, began to raise police funding, which coincided with a rise in crime, increased food and gas prices, which led to multiple protests against him, went even farther and created a referendum to repeal 8 elements of Correa's constitution, which failed by massive margins. But there was also one more problem with the fact that he was the one in charge. He wasn't the only one in charge. In the National Assembly, the left was in charge. So he wasn't really able to do that much. Like, I mean, aside from all that, he wasn't really able to do much because they kept trying to stop him. All of this culminating in efforts to impeach him due to multiple corruption scandals found in the Pandora Papers. The first effort, in December of 2021, failed relatively quick. But then on May 9th of 2023, more evidence had piled up, considering his brother-in-law was caught trying to embezzle public funds, which made the opposition start a more formal process to get him out of the presidency. And right as they were about to go to trial, Lasso announced that he would do the Muerte Cruzada, aka mutual death, which would dissolve the Ecuadorian government and call for an early election, with Lasso making it known that this would effectively be his resignation, triggering a 3-month special election that was wrought with way more political stability than before, particularly the assassination of a presidential candidate by the name of Fernando Villavicencio, who, right before his death, was actually polling really well. Correa had a nominee ready to fight for the control of the nation, ready for Wave 3 of the pink tide to come back. But she failed too. Who did they choose instead? A man by the name of Daniel Noboa, son of businessman and 5-time presidential candidate Alvaro Noboa, currently the world's youngest world leader, who has tried to paint himself as a new direction for Ecuador, rejecting old paradigms of political leanings of Ecuador. You know, basically his whole shtick is like, I'm not left, I'm not right, I'm forward. However, as we all know, every single person who says not left, not right, forward literally means not left, right. And despite the fact that he has only been in office for 1 year, it has been a very impactful year. The first thing that got a lot of people's attention was in January of 2024, when a gang leader escaped prison and Noboa declared a state of emergency, which gave the authorities power to suspend people's rights and the military to be deployed into prisons, emulating the harsh on-crime policies of Nayib Bukele, a borderline dictator, which led to many prison riots and for organized crime to literally start running wild in the streets. A famous incident being when they held a news crew hostage while they were on the air. A second incident that was very interesting was the issue with another politician in Ecuador. You see, Correa's second vice president and Moreno's first vice president, Jorge Glass, was supposed to be arrested due to alleged corruption, but he had fled to the Mexican embassy, claiming that he was being politically persecuted by the right wing in Ecuador and requested asylum. While he didn't have asylum at the time, legally, Ecuador couldn't do anything except ask Mexico nicely if they could arrest him. And for months, Mexico just decided to ghost them. It wasn't until April that they had finally received any sort of response after months. They were like, please, AMLO, give us this prisoner, please, 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 please. And it wasn't until during one of AMLO's like conferences that he was actually confronted, and he's just like, yeah, okay. So what he ended up saying was, like, what he ended up doing instead of actually talking about the case, he literally just said, you know, if Villavicencio wasn't assassinated, Noboa wouldn't even be president right now, so why should I listen to him? Like, he basically just decided to shit-talk Noboa on live TV. So then what ended up happening is that Ecuador decided to declare the Mexican ambassador to the nation a persona non grata and formally requested to have all the Mexican diplomats kicked out of the country. And AMLO responded by just saying, okay, then fine then. We'll give Glass asylum. He literally just said, yep, Glass is given asylum now. And due to the fact that he got asylum, they demanded that Ecuador literally stay out of the way while they transport him from the embassy to Mexico. Ecuador responded by breaking into the embassy, causing harm to the many diplomats working there, even threatening to shoot one, with Mexico officially severing relationships with Ecuador, going to the International Court of Justice, who refused to hear the case, and even justices in Ecuador decried this as illegal and arbitrary. There's actually a picture on the Wikipedia page. I don't know if it's like a specific page about this incident, but it's a picture of like an Ecuadorian embassy like an Ecuadorian member of like an ambassador with right standing next to the Mexican ambassador, and the Mexican ambassador is like turns their back to them because they do not recognize Ecuador anymore. But the last incident that I find funny is in regards to Noboa's vice president, Veronica Abad Rojas. She and Noboa have a very complicated relationship, and you'll see why I call it that. Upon being elected, Noboa decided that he was going to task her with being Ecuador's embassy and envoy to the Israel-Palestine conflict. Now, that's a little interesting, sending your vice president over 7,000 miles away from you specifically. And seemingly, it's because Noboa and Rojas did not exactly see eye to eye. Rojas is seemingly a lot more of a right-wing ideologue than Noboa, who's made some controversial statements that maybe Noboa is opposed to. He even decided to reorganize the nation so that the vice president has less power in his administration. Seems this was done to give himself more power than it was to, remove her power, but, regardless. Nothing of this seems too out of the ordinary necessarily, but there's even a funny thing. It turns out that she can't even do her job right because he asked her to leave Israel for a bit to head to Turkey on the 1st of September, and then she showed up in Turkey on the 9th of September, which led to Noboa to actually decide to officially suspend her as the vice president entirely, which, you can't necessarily blame Noboa. He fired her for not doing her job. Although, the reason she might not have been doing her job was because 4 months prior to him asking her to do this, he had announced that he was running for re-election and had replaced her as the vice presidential candidate. With her even going so far as to say that the reason why she thinks that he sent her over there was because she thought that he was she said that he sent her to Palestine to die. Really, it just seems really fucking weird. Okay, so, what are the issues of the election going in? With all that pretext, what are the issues that are going in? So, some of the major issues, it seems that there are 3 major issues: crime, corruption, and Correa. Some people see many of these as interchangeable because there's this big conspiracy theory that Correa is some sort of evil narco drug lord president, even though that's not true. But who are the people that are running? There are 16 people running for the presidential election. And there's been a bit of a concern, as it's going to be, not because this is only twice as many candidates as last time, but because many of these are because of divisions in political groups in the nation. You'll notice I mentioned that in the election that Moreno's party ran in after he decided to resign, or not resign, but retire, there were 16 candidates. But then there were, there was another election, after the Muerta Cruzada, where a lot of parties decided to join in coalitions with each other, basically to try and, steamroll and keep things fine. But turns out that this time, a lot of those coalitions have finally severed, and, it's not really turning out so well, and there's a bit of a divide with a lot of people. And as such, it can be a little bit difficult to try and figure out who is considered a viable candidate, who's not considered a viable candidate. Especially consider, I've seen some polling, and there's some polling that will literally be 32, 32, 0.5, 0.6, 0.7. So it's I'm not really, I want to give, enough of a explanation of the candidates so that you can kind of understand, how the election is. So for this case, we're going to go with be covering, half of them. Not necessarily the ones that are going to be viable, although we will talk about the viable ones. I think viable ones a bit more. But it's also to kind of get a general idea of how the Ecuadorian political scene is. So I'm basically just picking the ones the major political factions of Ecuador. And right off the bat, why don't we just get into Daniel Noboa himself? He is the candidate of the National Democratic Action, a center-right, allegedly big tent party that, fun fact, actually used to be an alliance that has the Revolutionary and Democratic Ethical Green Movement, or Mover Party. Why is that important? Well, the Mover Party used to be the País Alliance, which used to be the party of Rafael Correa. So that's just interesting. The next candidate is Henry Kronfel, the president of the National Assembly, running with the Christian Social Party, a Christian democratic and socially conservative political party that used to be seen as more of a right-wing bloc with Noboa, but has started shifting away. The next candidate is Carlos Rabascal, a journalist, businessman, and 2021 vice presidential candidate. He is running under the Democratic Left Party, a center-left social democratic party. His nomination is odd for both sides of this issue. You see, Rabascal ran as the vice president of the Correas candidate Andres Ares in the last cycle, and actually attempted to become the Correas party last. Okay, so basically, like, he ran as the VP in the 2021 election, and then in the 2023 election, he wanted to be their candidate that time, but that second time it didn't happen. And the Democratic left actually supported Noboa's bid last time. So the fact that the two forces are together shows both sides are breaking up with their mainstream people, and the Democratic left has actually started to have some schisming because of this. Because some of them are like, no, we can't support a Correist, because a lot of people really don't like Correa. Like, even if they're left-wing, they just don't like Correa. The next candidate is Francisco Tabachi, governor of Guayas, running under the party Creating Opportunities, or Creando Oportunidades, or CREO, or I Believe, or I Create. There are a lot of different names that this party can go under. The center-right neoliberal political party of Lasso. It is still there, but currently is losing a bit of momentum, with other right-wing forces in Ecuador rising to the occasion. The only major piece of their platform I could find is that they just really want to copy Nayib Bukele's justice system. The next candidate is Jimmy Jairala, former assemblyman and prefect from Guayas, running under the Democratic Center, a centrist populist party that was born from the right-wing faction of Correism. The next candidate is Henry Cusalon, the former minister of government and former assemblyman, running under Movimiento Construye, a formerly Big Tent party that in the last presidential election teamed up with a smaller right-wing populist party, which has essentially led to them taking over, leading to them becoming seemingly a new right-wing force in Mexico, at least for now. Carrillo didn't run last time, but given the stink of Lasso, we'll see if they keep this up. This is the party that the candidates that was assassinated ran under. Basically, one of their big things is, like, we're anti-corruption, and he basically rode on, like, that wave of, like, I'm anti-corruption, and he's like, I'm anti-corruption for everybody. Because one big thing you'll see is, like, the Correists will, of course, run on we're anti-corruption, but they'll say only the right-wing candidates are corrupt. Then, the right-wing candidates will say, we're running against anti-corruption, but only the Correists are corrupt. Meanwhile, the MC, Movimiento, or the MC, they basically say, look, guys, we think you're both corrupt, so why don't we do some corruption? Why don't we do a little bit of anti-corruption on everybody's side? Here are the bit of its platform that I could find. Anti-corruption, obviously. The elimination of the Council of Citizen Participation and Social Control, the elimination of their Judicial Council, reducing the number of assembly members, and allowing private investment in the energy sector. The next candidate is Leonidas Iza, the president of the Confederation of Indigenous Nationalities in Ecuador, running under the Pachakutik movement, Plurinational Unity Movement, an indigenous rights/environmentalist party that opposes the Correas movement because of its favorabilities for oil extradition. And due to that fact, they've had a lot of very interesting developments in this regard. So basically, one of the big things that was very notable for this movement was, like, one of the reasons why this movement became so popular is because of a guy by the name of Yaku Perez. Yaku Perez was their presidential candidate for the last 2 cycles, I believe. Kind of. He was their candidate in 2021, and then in their last presidential election, I don't think he was officially the candidate of this party in that race. I think that time he was basically running like a solo bid. But I think they endorsed him technically, but they didn't, like, it wasn't like a formal endorsement. It was basically, yeah, I mean, we'll just vote for this guy. But what's made him interesting is the fact that he hated Correa so much that he actually endorsed Lasso in the 2017 election because he didn't trust Moreno because he was a Correist. So that's funny. He voted against Moreno, not because he thought that he was going to be a turncoat to Correa and the left-wing movement, but because he thought that he was going to be just like Correa. And during his first run of office, he actually kind of did the whole, like, right-wing BS thing, where it's like, the Venezuelans are actually trying to work to elect Correa's party to be the leader of this country. You know, kind of like cringe, like, Red Scare type tactics. When he actually ran for president the first time, there was actually a little bit of an issue because with him publicly endorsing Lasso the last time, they were worrying like, what is he gonna do this time? Like the big thing is that people were worried about like what would happen in like a 2-round system with those two, but like it was Andres Arez versus Lasso, so they're like, okay, but what's he gonna do now? And while Yaku Perez actually went so far as to like just say, no, I do not like Lasso anymore. I will not endorse Lasso. I think both of these guys are shit. His party did help elect Lasso. Like they did help him elect a head of the National Assembly, which is where the beginning of their schism happened. But another thing that's very interesting is that Iza and Yaku actually don't like each other because Yaku accused Iza of being too close to the Correas movement. So there's a little bit of a issue there as well. Okay, I've talked about it long enough. The Correas movement. What about the Correas movement? Who do they have in their election? All right, so the next candidate, the final candidate, is Luisa Gonzalez, former member of the National Assembly and 2023 runner-up. She's running under the Citizens Revolution Party with the support of the Rito movement. The Rito movement is a centrist liberal party, and the Citizens Revolution Party is Korea's new party, 21st century socialism, post-neoliberalism, the basics. However, there is one big thing that is very interesting about this party and this person. The thing that divides Luisa and this party from other leftist groups is their massive social conservatism. Luisa used to be a member of a right-wing political party, the Christian Social Party. Remember them? I mentioned their nominee way early on. Okay, and Correa was kind of a little bit of a social conservative in his own right. He threatened to resign from the presidency if abortion was legalized and oppose same-sex marriage. However, I mentioned before, he did try to mitigate some of those issues by offering other alternatives, like I told you, he tried to implement like family planning things like the day after pill, and he also tried to pass civil unions, but he didn't want gay marriage. So it's like a little bit of a here and there thing, but like I'll just say this. Last time we had a socially conservative leftist win the nation, we got Pedro Castillo. And, things didn't turn so well for Pedro Castillo, so just keep that in mind. Now, why don't we get into some of the events of the campaign? This is one thing that's actually interesting, because, let's just get into it. It seems that every single candidate in this race is trying to make a plea to the youth vote via TikTok. Remember them? Before they started going bye-bye? All of which seemingly revolving around Korea. Like, everybody just seems to really, really want to talk about Korea. You see, young people do not remember Korea's administration. So basically, anybody can say anything about Korea's administration now, and it could stick. Right-wingers are going to say Korea's this evil, evil dictatorial man. He's doing all this bad stuff. He's blah, 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 whatever. Meanwhile, the Koreas are going to say, man, back then, those were the good old days when Korea did this, when Korea did this social program, he did this social program, he did this thing, and that thing. So, yeah. But another thing that's been going on is that multiple of the candidates have been facing death threats during this campaign. And that's a big deal, especially considering in the last cycle, one of them literally got assassinated. So, keep that in mind. Especially considering, I think one of them literally, if I remember correctly, Fernando Villavicencio, he literally got assassinated like a week before the election. Like the race was almost done. Like the race was about to like start mailing ballots or whatever. But whatever. And the next big interesting thing is Daniel Noboa has apparently been committing multiple campaign violations during this election. In Ecuador, the president takes a leave of absence during the campaign. I talked a little bit about that in a previous Mexican election video where I talked about how some politicians can take a leave of absence when they, it's like they effectively resign from their position, but not in a way that they can't get that position back should they fail. And in Ecuador, the president is supposed to officially request a leave of absence to run, and other politicians are supposed to take this leave of absence officially to run. When the National Assembly does this, it effectively goes into a recess, and when the president does this, he's supposed to delegate his position to the vice president. But remember, he doesn't like his vice president. So, but he wants her to resign so that he can appoint a new vice president so that he can give that vice president the power while he runs. And his vice president has said no. She refuses to resign. So what ended up happening is that Noboa decided, you know what, if you're not going to resign, then I refuse to take a leave of absence. I'm going to use my position. I'm going to run while I still have the position of president. And his party, deciding to show solidarity with him, decided that none of their public officials would take their leave of absence. And this led to a very massive problem because there's a reason why they don't let them do this in this official position. Because Noboa has been using public funds to run his campaign. He kicked off his re-election bid at the presidential palace, and during New Year's, they filled a national landmark with campaign materials, which is explicitly banned under Ecuadorian law. And it wasn't until multiple complaints were filed, it wasn't until multiple of the opposition parties decided to file and be like, yeah, this is illegal, you can't do this, that it wasn't until then that they actually were forced to even remotely do this. Like, his party in the National Assembly just like, okay, we'll take our leave of absence now. But then when it came to Noboa still said, no, I refuse to have my VP take over. So what he ended up doing is that he decided to take one of his cabinet ministers and force them into the vice presidential role, and then say, okay, this person's going to be the person that I choose to run and be the new president. But they said, no, your vice president is still the vice president, so they are the ones who are in charge. But what about polling? Well, polling is pretty obvious. The runoff the last time was Daniel Noboa versus Luisa Gonzalez, and the polls effectively show that race is going to be how it is. Because there's been that many candidates that have been there have been a couple of candidates that have been able to get, somewhat close. Somewhat, but not necessarily. Okay, so let's look at this. This is a poll thing that says here, of, the most recent poll that has been done is this. Daniel Noboa with 32.6%, Luis Gonzalez with 29.9%, Isa with 2.2%, Kronful with 0.4%, some other smaller candidates that weren't really that necessarily notable getting one. Like I said, I told this a little bit at the beginning where it's there are some candidates that are just it's basically Gonzalez and Noboa, and then the rest get basically fight for scraps. The closest any candidate has gotten to even remotely being close to Noboa and Gonzalez is there was a brief. Okay, this was actually a pretty good poll. It was conducted on December 14th, and it has 10,000 people who went to the poll, and it has a margin of error of 0.03%. And it shows Luisa Gonzalez with 40%, Daniel Noboa with 38.05%, and Henry Kronfel with 10.38%. That is the closest any of the candidates have gotten. Hold on. While I'm here, let's check the Spanish wiki. No, it basically just adds a couple of more polls, and they basically show similar things. There's one poll that's weird a bit. It was conducted on January 11th, and what it did is it has two versions of the poll. One where it says Noboa, Gonzalez, and I presume basically they just say any of the opposition candidates. And what happened with that one is that it shows Noboa with 47.3%, Gonzalez with 43.3%, and the rest of the opposition getting a combined total of 9.4%. And then there's another one that says okay, I guess they basically did but which opposition figure do you support? And then it literally goes okay, Daniel Noboa with 36.1%, Luis Gonzalez with 33.0%, then Isa with 2%, Kronfel with 0.3%, Jarila with 0.7%, Queselon with 0.5%, Rabascal with 0.6%, whatever. And what do I do? Conclusion / support? I wet my hands clean to the affair. I can't, in any good faith, endorse any of the candidates in this race. Rabascal, Isa, and Gonzalez all have some slight issues that cause me to be weary, but not enough to go #canceled for anybody who supports these guys. There are 4 other smaller leftist candidates in the race: Ivan Sanquila, Jorge Escala, Juan Ivan Cueva, and Pedro Granja, who are also fine. I really don't endorse any of them, really. I I don't really care. Like, literally, it could be any of those guys, and I really wouldn't mind. The only thing that's very consistent is that I unequivocally endorse against Noboa. And that will continue in the second round. So basically, I would say, if you're an Ecuadorian in my audience, which you probably aren't, but if you were, hypothetically, you could vote for any of the smaller candidates, and I wouldn't care. As long as you vote against Noboa in the second round, and I don't care who it's for you there either. Maybe Luisa Gonzalez gets elected and proves me wrong. I'd love to be proven wrong. I'd love for her to literally prove me wrong. But the fact of the matter is, I don't think she will. I think she will still just be... Like, I think she'll be as bad as Pedro Castillo if she did get elected. But again, she could prove me wrong. Maybe she just will be, like, relatively bad. Maybe it's all a ploy just to get elected. I don't know. But I don't really have high hopes. Maybe it's fine. Maybe it won't. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see on that. Anyways, thanks for watching this video. Be sure to like, comment, share, subscribe, and click the bell to notify when a future video comes out. And if you want some more content from me, consider supporting me on Patreon.